Herzlich willkommen zu Most Wanted Music 2021. Es geht weiter mit unserer nächsten Session. Freue mich auch sehr drauf. How we listen, discover music from underrepresented communities. This will be an online session. We have 3 presenters, which is Marc Brown, founder of Byte.com. Then we have Jewell Sparks, who is managing director and speaker of Byte House Group. And then we have freelance journalist Annabel Ross. Please introduce yourself if I forgot something. Yes. Noch nicht hören. Also ja. If you have questions online, you can place them in our chat, and then after the session, in 50 minutes, we're gonna discuss them here. Thank you.
beta.com, a platform for setting and receiving digital audio in a clean and simple way. And we have another sister site called HowWeListen. And that came out of this idea a couple of years ago that we got quite frustrated about the fact that that essentially when you read in the press a lot of the time you hear about streaming services that all you need to do is follow the algorithm or just listen to a playlist. That's how people discover music these days. And for us as a company, we know that music discovery is a lot more nuanced. And so we started this interview series that we run every week where we ask artists and their teams about how they find and listen to new music. And out of that, we've done a lot of these online panels where I moderate and I talk to people about how they find and listen to music, maybe in different parts of the world or different genres. And so when this came up, I thought it was a really interesting opportunity to talk about the challenges of music discovery for different communities, both online and offline. And so before we get into that, I just want to introduce our guests and get you both to talk about who you are and what you do. And so I want to introduce first Jewell Sparks, who is above me. But Jewell, I will get you to tell us where you are and what you do.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jewell Sparks. I'm actually here in Berlin, and there's a feedback. But either way, I'm here in Berlin, and I'm the managing director of Bid House Group and United 17 Venture Group. And basically, I focus a lot on innovation scouting and discovery and entrepreneurship development. And we actually have a music label series, which actually launches today, called Beyond the Music Label Series. And it's really about focusing and identifying underrepresented talents and developing them. So nice to meet everyone. I have a feedback, so I'm going to stop talking.
And I have that feedback too. So I think the key is that you say a line, you let it echo, and then you say the next line again. So Annabel, be prepared. And I
Okay.
think it's quite early for you over there in New York. Is that correct?
It is 7 a.m. So that's quite early by my standards. But yes, I'm based in New York. I am originally from Melbourne, Australia. I moved here in June 2019, and I'm a freelance journalist who writes mainly about music and culture for publications such as Resident Advisor, Mixmag, The Guardian, Vice, etc. And I am particularly interested in diversity, representation, inclusion, and safety in music. Yeah, that
Perfect.
feedback is pretty bad,
So,
hey?
yeah, it is very bad. If anybody can sort out that feedback, that would be great. I'd really appreciate it. Or what we'd all appreciate, pardon me. So, let's just talk a bit about music discovery. This idea that certain parts of the music ecosystem like to think that there's only one way of doing things versus the actual reality that there's lots of ways people discover music. So let's talk about you both. You do different jobs, you live in different parts of the world. How do you find music yourselves as music fans first and foremost? Jewel, should we start with you?
Sure. I usually use a lot of the different discovery platforms,
Like which ones?
meaning gig platforms. Like I love, like in the US, I've used Sonic Bids for over 13 years.
Wow.
Here in
Okay.
Germany and Europe, I use Gigment. Yay, one of my favorites. And so I think it's really interesting to utilize those platforms. But again, it goes back to what we're talking about, that if artists don't know about those platforms still may not be the ultimate and only sources that we should utilize to identify new talent.
Okay. So do
Mm.
you find mostly that live is the big driver for you when it comes to music discovery? Jewel.
Could you repeat that?
So, for you, do you find mostly as a music fan that live is ultimately the key source for new music discovery for you?
The feedback is so bad, I missed out the actual essence of the question.
I was curious to know if live music is the key driver for your music
Oh,
discovery.
no, most definitely not. Most definitely not.
So,
Live music isn't the key driver. I'm more of a digital native, so I usually listen to music mainly at home versus going to a lot of live concerts. I say I go to live concerts about 20% of my music discovery
okay,
discovery
perfect.
experience.
So, Annabelle, as a writer, you must receive a lot of new music. It must come to you via PRs. Is that the big
Yeah,
driver for you mostly?
it's not the big driver for me, no. I try to, I also use discovery platforms. I use Bandcamp, I use YouTube, SoundCloud, social media a lot of the time. I sort of look at who people I'm following, who they're listening to, who they're talking about, then I would go and check them out, and go from there. I do listen to some promos, but there's just way too many to get through them all. And I'm also conscious of limiting myself to what's sent to me. Like, I think it's important to also branch out outside of that and do a bit of self discovery.
So you've brought up a good point about the fact that there's so much music and as a as someone who's a writer, you receive a lot of that. But I think we'd all agree that it's the same for everyone. Moving from a physical world to a digital world, this flood of information and different types of music from different platforms, social media, is ultimately probably a good thing. Is it not, that we have access to all this music with one click? What do you think of that?
It is, in a sense, that there's so much there, but it's also overwhelming and impossible to get through it all. And it means that there's some great music that you're going to miss. And I think that's that's sort of the question of this talk, is that how do you try and ensure that what you're making and what you're sending out there cuts through?
Jewell, what's your take?
Are you muted?
I think, yeah, well, I think you're muted now.
I really like the diversification of the tools that's used
Can you talk a bit
in
more
order
about
for
the
the discovery, since
diversification
I
of the
live
tools?
across. So I think it's important to use, like, for example, like a gig tool for live acts. If you have access as a publisher, as a promoter, as a producer. And I also think it's great, with the Spotify, the SoundClouds, Facebook, Instagram. I think all those platforms are really great because it helps with the identifying different talent that's happening across the globe.
So you think a key to having a good understanding of a broad diversity of artists comes from using a broad amount of platforms, so that you're ensuring that you're not
Yes, for
relying on
sure.
one source for information?
Definitely not. Because I think one source of information is biased. And I'm all about diversity and disrupting the status quo.
Okay,
So I
Annabel,
like
what do
to
you
hear from others what they think is good or not.
well,
Mm.
Annabel, I was going to ask you what you think about when it comes to the multitude of platforms. Do you feel it?
Yeah, I think that.
uh, Go on, sorry.
No, sorry, you go on. What were you going to say?
No, you mentioned that it's somewhat overwhelming with the flood of information, but do you feel that it's important not to sit back, to be more active in just trying to search out different sources of information, even though there's an overwhelming amount of information, because that's the key to broad music discovery?
Definitely. And I think uh, I often have artists reach out to me as well and send me their music. And of course, I'm not going to get through all of it, but I think that I try to, like, I'll try and listen to it where I can. And I do think that, yeah, what if you're taking music from just one platform, then it's a curated, as Jules says, it's like a biased view of what's out there. And it's kind of our job to look further and broader and deeper to see what else is out there.
And Jewell, if we come back to you, as I thought it was very interesting your label that focused on emerging artists and your motto about connect the dots. And I thought maybe we could talk about that because if you have newer artists that you're looking to promote and you see that there are all these different platforms out there, what kind of strategies do you have as a label owner to start to promote the idea that your artist should try to reach as many people as possible? What strategies do you have in your label for that?
Actually, I'm glad you asked that because I actually conduct a workshop with the Grammy Foundation monetizing the creativity for artists. And I make sure that they understand who they are and who they want to be as an artist, and make sure that they spend time on their, I would say, their pitch or their positioning in the market. And I say this because there's a lot of artists out there, just like we talk about on a regular basis. And so differentiation of yourself is very important
And do you
as an artist.
do you feel that it's important as an artist to understand, what are you saying, that it's important for artists to know their own context around who they are in order to be able to deliver that to other people, to reach other people?
Most definitely. And also in order to decide which platform's the best platform.
And
Mhm.
I'm assuming you're not going to be able to answer this in one line, but how would an artist start to decide which platform might be best for them?
I think it depends on what stage they are in their career, actually. So if they're trying to build up fans, obviously, I mean, Facebook has been around for a while, so I think that that's a great platform in collaboration with traditional like music platforms. Because even if you look at the input variables for like the gig platforms, whether it's Sonic Bids or GigMit, they kind of lead you in one direction in terms of the information that you need to put in there in order to attract artists, right?
Yes.
And it's not necessarily a global way to position what you're looking for when you're looking for gigs or bands to play. So obviously, if you're a artist and you wanna go live or you wanna travel across the globe or you wanna perform and make a percentage of ticket sales from a venue or something like that, you would use that type of platform.
Do you
Maybe if you're at a different stage in your development and you wanna attract more brands, maybe, believe it or not, something like a LinkedIn may be better.
I'm giving you a dramatic pause so you can finish. If you want to add anything extra.
Oh, I was finished. I can't hear. No, I don't wanna add anything else. I can't, this is
Uh, so, so Annabel, what do you think about what we're talking about here? The idea that artists need to have a context around who they are first in order to make those first few steps to try to figure out who they're going to reach.
Well, I'm also thinking about how a lot of underrepresented communities have been forming their own collectives. and some of them have been around for a few years. Like there's Disc Woman, who are predominantly promoting women of color. There's Daytimers in the UK for South Asians and Eastern Martians, which is like Eastern and Southeastern Asians. And I think that they shouldn't be forced to have to do this, but a lot of these collectives are sort of like banding together and doing their own thing and getting noticed for it and getting attention as a community. And from there, their individual artists can shine. And I don't think that the onus should be on the artist to have to do that, but it's effective and it works and it's empowering.
Now, these collectives, are they artist collectives?
Predominantly, yes.
So I think it's interesting what Jewell's talking about, how she does workshops, and then you're talking about artist collectives. And do you both feel that this has to do with the fact that it, being in music and being an artist is very complicated, and that there's a challenge, a barrier to music discovery is based on the potential lack of knowledge? So the knowledge transfer that Jewell, you explain in the workshops you do, or Annabel in these collectives, that people are grouping together to exchange information in order to work with each other to develop their own communities and their own audiences?
Well, I think the lack of knowledge comes from lack of representation. And the problem is like it's the media and almost all of the promo companies in electronic music are white owned. And so it's really hard for some of these people to get their music heard through the traditional means. So it's not so much about, yes, it's a question of knowledge, but it's that comes from whether or not the music's been exposed in the first place. And it's gone through the gatekeepers, basically.
Jewell, what's your take?
I think you need to use both. You have to use your communities, and obviously you need to know what resources are out there.
And
And I think it is true that there's different preferences for music. And that's okay. But what I like about the pandemic, I was talking to your colleague about this yesterday, is that we all had a lot more time to discover music that we probably wouldn't have listened to before.
Annabel, do you agree with that comment, that music discovery has become not increased, but that people have more time to dedicate to slow listening, maybe?
I think it probably depends on what you were doing during the pandemic, like, and whether or not you did have the opportunity to explore a lot of new music. I'm sure a lot of people did. I don't know if I necessarily like explored more than before, but it's different because I was doing it quite a lot anyway. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's the case for a lot of people.
So I do want to go back to this point about you, Annabelle. You mentioned the promoters being, the companies are owned by white men. You said, are those say the promo companies,
Yeah,
or
so a lot of the actually like quite a lot of them are owned by women, but not many that I've come across are owned by black people. And it's usually white British or white American, white European. So, and they represent the same artists and clients. So you're getting a lot of the same kind of music. And I think, if you work in music media and rely on these resources a lot, then that's a really limited scope of artists that you're being exposed to. But I think, yeah, the onus is on us, the writers, as well as bookers and promoters and everyone else involved to, I think, like, yes, artists can do as much as they can to get themselves seen as and heard, but it's up to all of us to facilitate that, I think, as well.
because one thing I've noticed is a return to more DIY culture. And so that idea of the collective that you're talking about, exchanging information, um, do you feel that that's an effective way to overcome these situations where there's lack of diversity in the people who promote music?
Yes, I do. And it's not just exchanging information. They're starting record labels, they're throwing events, they're doing lots of great stuff, and they're energized by each other and getting a lot of attention that way without needing to get permission or approval from anyone else. And that's just coming naturally.
Jewell, what do you feel about that? When you work with artists, what kind of feedback do you give them about gatekeepers and needing approval or not needing approval?
Well, actually, luckily for me, I interact with most of the gatekeepers. Being born and raised in Wichita, Kansas, I was the one diversity in my network. So I realized early on how important it was to make sure to embrace myself as a diverse being, as well as the benefits of having networks that were diversified. And I think that the reverse, though, needs to start happening.
So tell us a bit more about that.
I think that business products and services are only as good as the social networks of the people who own the businesses or the products or the services.
And so that those social networks of the
Need to be
owners of
more
the products and
diversified.
services are okay.
So
So
what I'm
that would
saying
mean,
is people should make more of an effort to have more of an effort to have friends that don't look like them or that from different places or different ages or in different careers. And that's the best way to get a good product or service that serves society or community.
Annabelle, what's your take?
And I think that's 100% true. If you're mixing with
And
diverse group of people anyway, and these are your networks that you're telling them your news and getting information from them as well, then yeah.
And then
And
these
so one thing
barriers
I
that
just
are
want.
visible go
Oh,
away.
Sorry, I missed what you said, Jewel.
I just said when you do that, the barriers that are visible go away.
Hmm.
and Annabelle, one thing I wanted to ask you about to do with being in the media, it's always a common perception that you need to hire someone to contact the media. Um,
Mm.
but it would be fair to say that artists could contact people directly. Is that not correct? And if these collectives exist and record labels start, and you know there are workshops and ways to educate artists, they can take control of this stuff themselves without having to look to these organizations that promote. Is that not correct? Like that you interact with artists directly, correct?
I do. I think it depends on it's personal choice. It depends on how much money an artist has that they're willing to spend. And yes, having a professional PR person can be helpful if that person has a relationship with the media that you want your music in front of. But it's also, I think, an individual thing as to how receptive a particular journalist is to receiving music from artists, whether it's like social media or being emailed. And I think it's definitely worth doing. But again, it's like it's a time investment, and there's no guarantee that they actually will listen to it. But I think an introduction and hey, like, let me know what you think of this. Would love to hear your thoughts. Like, it definitely doesn't go astray.
Jewell, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree 100%, but it also goes back to resources again, resources and access. And if you don't have resources and access, 9 times out of 10, you won't be discovered.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about that a bit. And some solutions to both of those things. What do you think on the resources side? What do you think can be done to move resources towards more underrepresented artists? Or how can those artists find resources themselves?
You talking to me specifically on this?
Yes, sure.
Oh, yes. Okay. Um, that's actually one reason why I started the Beyond the Music label series. Because I am a woman of color. I appreciate all types of music. And I have a diversified network who are gatekeepers, from producers to nonprofit founders to investors to label owners to partnership alliances. And this is actually what the diversity edit is doing, is challenging the status quo.
And so again, that's been with knowledge. It sounds like, and distributing music through the gatekeepers, you know. But specifically with resources, do you have any insights on how to combat that? That there are certain resources in certain parts of the music ecosystem, but not in the other.
Yeah, I mean, because it's important for people to be proactive and then identify resources that can be paid for, but then resources or companies that are willing to provide access to tools or resources that artists can use to develop and promote themselves.
Okay.
So I
So
usually don't work with
that's
brands who aren't willing to pay a percentage of what they do forward.
okay. That's a very that's a smart way of looking at it. Do you feel that enough organizations are paying forward, or is
You
it
know, you
very
don't need
short-sighted,
massive
do you think?
numbers. You don't need massive numbers. You know, there's this saying like about like go where your tribe is. I mean, I like things that are organic and authentic, right? I don't need the masses. I just need a few people who see the value proposition or organizations that want to work with different entities in order to uplift the entire industry.
Annabelle, what are your thoughts on some solutions within the industry, be it resources or other things, to try to combat what we've been discussing?
Yeah, I mean, I think if some companies were able to allocate a portion of resources to underrepresented communities and offer them subsidized rates and be proactive about trying to diversify their representation, then I think that's a really good place to start. But resources is about time as well. And
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, if you don't have the money or means to put on a PR agent, then as well as like making your music and presumably having to do something else to make ends meet. And then when you're doing your own publicity on top of that, it's a lot time wise. So yeah, I think there needs to be a form of assistance from the labels and other people involved to make it easier.
So if we've identified some challenges within the people who work in and around music, and maybe what some solutions are, that's the first step. But I wanted to focus just a bit on the other side, that once, say, an artist's music is out on a streaming platform, um, or anywhere else digitally in the world, that I've read a lot about sort of inherent biases with algorithms on streaming platforms, for example, how uh,
Yes.
female music is there's a woman who does research in the Netherlands, basically how female fronted music or written music, surfaces less with algorithms. And Jewell, I see you smiling over there, like you might know what I'm talking about. Have you read some of this research?
Yeah, I'm a tech and innovation strategist expertise, so music tech is like big on my list. And it's true. The algorithms are biased because most of the people programming, again, are what Annabelle said, don't look like some of the diversity artists or the diverse artists that really you would see. So by default, what they're writing is a code is code that's familiar to them.
Mm.
Annabel, have you read or heard anything about this? Is this something you discuss in your work?
I don't tend to follow algorithms too closely or read up as much on that as I probably should. But I know from my own listening, like on Spotify or whatever, I do feel like you're fed a really narrow field of artists. And yeah, I think it can still be a great tool for discovering new music, but it's essentially more of what you like and know, or as Jewell says, more of what the programmer likes and knows.
So, Jewell, if I go back to you, what would you suggest, or what do you talk to your artists about to combat this problem? How do artists convince others to step outside of their own echo chambers, or how can we step outside our own echo chambers, do you think?
I mean, people have preferences. I mean, you can't like beat them upside the head to change something that they don't dig, you know? So I think it goes back to what Annabelle said. That's why there's these communities that are being built that they don't have to explain their music or explain their motivations or really over promote themselves. Like people just like the music they're creating, and so there's this collaborative, and then they just support each other. It's like no difference than someone that believes in God and goes to church every Sunday, and there's a sense of community. So
And
I
then how
think
do
the
you grow
way
that?
you communicate with those who are open to and maybe being proactive and saying, "Look, I'm looking for new music," or "We realize we wanna reach more communities, bring in a different sound, do something different than other companies." So I think that's the time or the window of opportunity to approach versus try to force something that may not happen. It's just that's a lack of, energy or loss of energy and respect and all that stuff. So don't try to explain something to people who aren't willing to listen.
So it's more about showing by doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Annabelle, what are your thoughts?
No, I think that's right. And it doesn't even feel necessarily like they're trying to get the attention of people outside of their circle. It just has this kind of unint that's the effect because they're doing stuff that's different and exciting, and they may not have had the platform for people to see what they're doing in the first place. But with that community energy and the momentum that they gather, I think that can be a lot more effective than a single artist getting signed to a promo company where their track may or may not be heard by a few journalists. I think it's a really like effective and authentic way of gathering buzz.
Via a community advancement instead of a one artist breaks through and then others follow?
I think so. I think because as a
Those who should
community, there's a
follow,
lot of you
follow.
breaking through together.
We've only got about 10 minutes left. So I thought, it, can we do questions? Does I don't know if that's even possible. But I'm gonna ask it anyway to just make it even more complicated. If that's at all
With an
possible.
echo, and I can't see you.
You can't see me? Huh. So does that mean there are no questions? Anyone? Anyone? Going once? Going twice? Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we just end with a couple last thoughts? Because Jewell, I want to come back to all the stuff that you do, because you sit on one side of the table, you work with artists, you run a label, you're trying to teach them how to exist in the ecosystem. So what are the most important points for you that you deliver to artists about how to be heard ultimately?
Short break, since this is the only time period she has, but maybe, yeah.
Hi.
Basically, I think the most important thing is for artists, again, to understand who they are and what they want out of their career. And then at that point in time, then you can be more targeted with your approach.
So that that the key point for you is that it comes back to the artist.
Yeah.
Okay, Annabel, what are
Not the
your last
artist to do
thoughts?
the heavy lifting, but the artist to know what they want.
I understand completely. I understand completely.
Mm.
And Annabel, what do you think on that?
Yeah, I agree. But I think essentially, I think it has to be like a collective
Hello?
effort. I
Yes.
think, yes.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
I can.
perfect.
yes.
So I have. Okay. So, yes, thank you so much for your input. We have two questions actually from the audience, and I would really love to address them. 1 second. Wo finde ich die Fragen? Die sind hier nicht mehr. Give me 1 second.
No problem. I'm jealous that you don't have an echo.
Okay. So, there's one question.
I'm jealous that you can see people.
So, there's one question from Calvin. Calvin was asking, with the direct access to massive amounts of music, how do you decide what new music to check out or what music to check out? Who would like to answer this question from you three? The question goes to you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Should I repeat the question?
Yes.
But I'd like Annabel or Jewell to answer.
Okay.
Annabelle, you want to take a stab at it?
Sure. How I discover music.
Yeah.
I think the
How
main
do
way
you decide
is
to what next music to check out?
Next music to check out. I guess I tend to follow up on things that I read about. And it may not be the artists who are like the topic of the feature themselves, but people who they mention who I'll then go and check out. And a lot of it is social media as well, seeing who people are talking about, seeing who's being booked a lot for the latest events, listening to mixes and hearing tracks and finding out who's playing them and then going to check out those artists. It is definitely a real mix.
Okay, thank you. Jules, do you have an answer to this? Do you want to add something?
Yes, yes. I actually try to stay away from media as much as possible.
Why so? And like, where do you still try to check out new music?
So what I do is I call on my trusted, diversified friends who work in different areas of business, media, labels,
Great answer.
tech, different events, actually like this as well. So
Yeah, I think that's of course maybe easier for some people, but some people don't have access to these kind of experts. But I think it's always important to ask around, to look in your own circle to see, and ask your friends, you know, what's new, what's out there, what you need to check out on. That would be my answer.
exactly. And I live between, as I mentioned Copenhagen, Amsterdam, San Francisco, New York, and London. So I always ask folks from those different areas, and it helps a lot.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination, you know. If you have the possibility to ask around, always do that. But I mean, of course, if you don't, and then also because of COVID, the past time, it wasn't always easy to connect with other people, and you know, so yeah. Anyone else? Or should we? There's another question.
Clubhouse.
What else? Yes, there's another question. Um, Emma is asking, am I in the wrong chat? Oh no. Yeah. What platform was good for traveling across the globe? Sorry, I missed that one. Yeah. So what platform was good for traveling across the globe, musically, I would say. I think the person missed that part of the conversation when you were talking about it. Do you have, I mean, yeah. Could you maybe give a few examples of platforms if you musically wants to travel around the globe and find music from different areas? Who wants to take that one? Yeah, who wants to start, please? Did you understand the question?
YouTube. YouTube, go ahead.
Okay, YouTube is one. What else? I mean, if I want
SoundCloud, Spotify.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Bandcamp.
nowadays Spotify, Apple Music make it quite easy also if you want to travel musically in different areas. But if you're looking for something that is more underground remixes, all that, then I maybe to give a small background, I'm also a DJ, and I was looking always for music to find for new music, and I think SoundCloud was really good for me to really dig into different kind of areas, different Brazilian music. There's so much from the Latin American continent, and Africa is also popping up. I think when it comes to African music, there are so many platforms in Africa where you can go to Boomplay, you can go to Aftown. I mean, there's so many different possibilities to check out music from Africa. Yeah, they're kind of smaller Spotify's concentrating on the African market, and yeah, if you Google them, you will probably find something.
And in Asian markets, every country.
Yeah.
Every country has their own platform.
I hope, Emma, you are happy with the answer. Did we forget anything?
I think the one key point is no matter what platform you're using, is that conscious act of listening should be at the core of that. That it's too easy just to sit back and let one song play from another to another to another. You can do that a bit, but by listening and learning and understanding who artists are, reading the bios, helps to make that journey from artist to artist and genre to genre much more purposeful.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. So I think we are at the end. There's no, yeah, Emma wrote thank you. So I get, she got something out of from our answers. Yeah, I think we're at the end of the session. Thank you so much for your input. It was really lovely to have you here in Berlin.